about
Just just some random shit I saw. I just clicked it last night. I just went to sleep really. Why so many young adults are still living with their parents in the U.S.? I wonder why. I wonder why they're lazy. They're not pulling themselves up by the bootstraps.
about 1 in 3 Americans between 18 and 34 years old live with their parents.
And while you may have heard more about this recently, this trend
I
isn't
have
new.
not.
Between 2005 and 2015, the share just grew very steeply over this 10-year period. Since then, it's been fairly stable. There was an uptick, of course, during the pandemic. In the wake of the pandemic, those rates of parental co-residence are now about where they were right before. Part of the reason we see this escalation of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks.
Nearly 30% of Gen Z said they would like to save but don't make enough money. And roughly 2 in 5 millennials and Gen Z adults feel it's harder to build financial wealth now than when their parents were their age because of the economy. 27-year-old Victoria Franklin has been living with her mother in New Jersey since she graduated college in 2019.
I saw all of the money that I was saving, and I thought maybe I should stay home for a little bit, and I didn't feel an urgency to move out.
Not everyone is enthusiastic about this trend.
You guys are making 6 figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money.
Oh, yeah. 36% of Americans said in a 2022 survey that
Man, shit.
more
Their parents have a fat house. What are you talking about?
young adults living with their parents is bad for society.
That's a big house. She shouldn't have to move out there. I ain't gonna lie. Like, if you could save, you could save. But like, if you're partnered with somebody, you should have your own place. But if you're single, like, you should definitely live with your parents. I mean, personally, like, it just makes it easier having dual income. Yeah, you should have a house if you have two people working full time.
So here's why young Americans are choosing to live with their parents and what the implications are for the U.S. economy.
My name is Victoria Franklin. I am 27 years old, and I live in my childhood home with my mother and my boyfriend.
Victoria graduated
Yeah, if you got a boyfriend, you shouldn't be moving in with the parents.
from the University of Miami in 2019
It's just weird.
and moved in with her mom when she was looking for a job.
After I saw the cost of living and things like that after I graduated, that maybe I'd be home for about a year.
More than half of Gen Z adults say they don't make enough money to live the life they want due to high cost of living.
I ended up bartending and waitressing until October, where I got my first offer, so it did take a little bit longer than I expected. Currently live at the Jersey Shore, and I was commuting into New York City, which takes about 2 hours each way. And I thought, in 6 months or so, I'll move into the city, be closer to the job, and the pandemic threw a wrench in those plans.
Victoria now works a fully remote job, which she says she probably wouldn't have if it weren't for the pandemic. Without a commute to worry about, she was able to stay at her mom's for longer.
It's a lot harder for young people today to save up for, markers of the American dream than it was for previous generations. Part of the reason we see this escalation of young adults not leaving the nest or returning to
I'd say the cost of living is too high, and maybe probably like cost of living, and there's too many things going on in that makes you have to spend a lot of money. Like, just everything in general costs so much money. If your car breaks down, you have to repair. That costs a lot of fucking money. And like groceries, like it's easier if everybody pitches in on a rent or something like that than just like spending all your money on a mortgage and stuff like that. You can weather the blows way better.
the nest is this idea that it was harder and harder for them to weather shocks. And so, for example, if they suffered a layoff or they suffer some sort of health shock or they got in a car accident, if they didn't have any additional credit to weather that shock, they would end up moving back home. The financial stability of young adults, their ability to pay for things if they got into an emergency, was one of the big factors influencing whether or not they were living on their own or living with their parents.
A significant number of Gen Z adults and millennials lack emergency savings. In fact, 46% of millennials and 32% of Gen Z have more credit card debt than emergency savings.
This can have ramifications for setting up a financial.
Yeah, I don't have credit cards. I learned my credit card debt thing in my 20s, and it's like all paid off. I think there's one credit card that's not paid off, but it's in collections. I don't know. I'll pay that off eventually, but yeah.
Future.
I had 2 credit cards maxed out and a loan. It's crazy.
Roughly 1 in 4 Gen Z adults say housing costs are one of the biggest challenges to financial success.
The prices of homes has escalated over the last few decades much faster than actual incomes. So it is actually much harder for a millennial or a Gen Z to save up for a down payment to buy a home. And that's something that bears out in the data.
The pandemic did have a lot to do with it. I saw how much I was saving, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't be paying, upwards of $3,000 a month and making somebody else richer when
You're paying $3,000 a month for rent. Just buy a house. Save up for a house and buy a house. That's the only reason why you should be moving in back in with your parents if you're in a relationship. If you're not, just save up money and stay with your parents. Like, your parents probably need extra help around the house anyways if they're older.
I could stay at home, save that money, and spend it on where I want to spend it. Between my job and my bartending and waitressing, I make anywhere from $85,000 to $95,000 a year. I would
not
say
bad.
about 40 to 50% of my salary is going right into savings. My mentality is, why rent and give my money to someone else when I can start to own? And so a big chunk of that money is going to go towards a down payment on a house.
Young
Okay,
adults
that's
ages
smart.
25
She's smart. That's what you're supposed to do.
to 34 in high cost of living areas are more likely to live with their parents. Nearly
Yeah, like if you live in the center of the country, the minimum wage is probably hella low. You know what I'm saying? So you're like, but the cost of living is probably low as fuck there too. But it's hard to find a lot of good careers out in those areas.
26% of young adults in New Jersey were living with at least one of their parents in 2022. The median household income in Oceanport, New Jersey, where the Franklins live, was nearly $133,000 in 2022.
I bet you that thing's like upward to like $500,000 to $800,000, maybe even $1 million house. That might be $1 million house. I've seen houses that are just as big, like up in Seattle, that are going for 1.2. It's crazy.
While the median value of
Area.
a home
Yeah, I see New Jersey median value
in the
is
region
yeah.
was around $644,000.
My dad built this house for $350,000 and was making probably $10,000 to $15,000 less than I was. My mom wasn't working at the time, and they were able to afford a $350,000 house on a $70,000 a year salary with a son. And that is just, that's not even the American dream anymore. That's not even possible. My aunt, who I fight with all the time, is always saying how you have to give somewhere, right? And my cousin said something.
You do have to make sacrifices, you know. Lifestyle, choice of lifestyle. You have to make sacrifices in like how you're gonna live for sure. You know what I'm saying? If you want to have nice things, it's just it's a give and take.
Her the other day and said, we're giving everywhere. We don't get property. We don't get good school systems. Whatever we're trading off is too much to trade off.
Victoria had brought up some conflict with her aunt a few times.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of trade-offs. I mean, it's just like free time, being able to travel or vacation or go out. Like, you're not going to be able to afford to do that. Like, you're just going to have to work and go home, work and go home. And nobody really wants to be a slave to the system like that. And I feel that because, like, it's rough. But you got to do what you got to do sometimes. But, yeah.
Oh, this is my Aunt Judy.
So I asked Aunt Judy to come on over and talk to us.
I talked about how much we fight about millennials, yes, but millennials living at home, and how you always say, well, you have to sacrifice something, but how much we're sacrificing. Like, we don't get like a big property, or we don't get like a nice house, or it's not in a good school system.
You have to start somewhere. You have to start anywhere. Just start your portfolio is what I told you. I don't care what it is. You don't have to live in Oceanport
That's exactly what my dad said. I don't care what it is, just start somewhere.
the first time.
And that's very true. You do have to start somewhere. I totally agree with that.
No, but you were able to live in Oceanport the first time.
Okay, I guess it was different times.
Gen X and baby boomers may have a tougher time understanding what young adults are going through today because they enjoyed, until the pandemic recession hit, a solid almost 15 years of uninterrupted economic expansion. Baby boomers, Gen X, they weathered many economic downturns, including major recessions. But I think the big difference is that when they were starting to form their own households and starting to accumulate wealth, housing and higher ed were both more affordable relative to their incomes than they are now.
When I started out, I was making $35,000 a year. That was nothing. And he was making $35,000 a year.
That's $60,000 a year combined, though. Back in like the fucking early 2000s and then late 90s. You know what I mean? That's really good for that time. That's pretty good fucking money. If one person was making $60,000 a year back in the early 2000s, like, you were balling. Trust me. I know that when my dad, he got his job. When he finally got a good job, we got a house, and he bought a house and everything. But he started off making $60,000 a year, and he was like, and I'm telling you, we went to Disneyland every year, and we had a nice house and nice things. And my mom was working too. She was probably making about 35. So together, it was about $100,000 a year. But like, that was balling. You know what I'm saying? Like, dual income, $100,000 a year is like crazy. So like, having $60,000 combined starting off was like, that's not bad at all for that time. You know what I'm saying? And like not at all. Like now it's like like both people have to be making $60,000 to $100,000 a year to be able to live comfortably, I think, and be balling out. Or to get a house and have 2 cars and kids and like to vacation every summer or whatever you want to do, like to have the American dream. You have to be making a lot of money. You're like $35,000 a year is working at a fast food joint right now. Like you can make that easily working at fucking McDonald's at minimum wage. You know what I'm saying? Like
You guys are making $6.
and that's like that's not nothing, you know, for one person. I mean that's rent. Like one check's going to rent and the other check's going to bills. You know what I mean? That's just how it goes now. Unless you have 2 people, if they're both making 35, then you're decent. You're okay. You could survive because at least like you could split that rent payment and then split the bills and then the rest of the money you both have, you're probably left over with like $1,000 if you're both working full time at minimum wage, And so like it's decent. You know what I'm saying? You can actually save, but still, you know what I mean? It's you have to make sacrifices here and there, and like people aren't in relationships like they used to be either back in the day. Like it's harder now for a lot of communities and stuff like that to be in relationships.
Figures together. You can't tell me you can't afford a house. They just don't want to spend their money.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't know.
Did you want it? What was my first house? 250 maybe? 270?
That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Where am I finding a $270,000 house?
No, you're not. You're buying a shack for $275,000. Like if you want a nice house, like I've seen, like I'm telling you're buying a shack. I've seen like shacks going for like $300,000 and $400,000 house, like shitty houses, with no like nothing, like ran down houses, nothing, like they're not nice. It's like actually fucked up.
I'm making $35,000 a year. Combined, we made 70.
Yeah.
In 1995, $70,000 was the equivalent of $145,000 today.
Yeah, look at that. See?
If you made $145,000 back then, you were balling. I'm telling you.
We do also have a situation that what is really good for an individual person or an individual family is not necessarily good for the entire macroeconomy.
The Federal Reserve estimates in a 2019 paper that young adults who move out of their parents' house would spend around $13,000 more per year on things such as housing, food, and transportation.
Yeah.
One of the big boosts to consumer spending is when people form households. Whether you're a renter or a buyer, you need to furnish that house. You need to fix things up in the home to make it livable. You end up spending a lot of money during that time.
Yeah.
So if the pace of household formation slows down, then that's going to slow down the pace of consumer spending, and that will produce a drag on the economy.
Another issue is that there aren't enough affordable properties in popular areas for younger people.
Because they're not building new houses and neighborhoods. They're trying to put up these apartments and charge you $3,000 for rent. It's like nobody fucking wants that. If there was actually more houses, I can understand in urban city areas, apartments, yeah, cool, whatever. But like you should have more neighborhoods being built.
People
like,
who are in entry
like build a lot of neighborhoods. That will drive down the cost of living.
level jobs and making less money.
Any sort of housing policy needs to be multi-pronged. Are there homes that are at the price point of these prospective home buyers? What can we do to increase the housing supply? What can we do to build? What can we do to help elder Americans, to help them downsize and move into more right-sized homes that will open up larger homes for young families? So I think one alone is not really going to do it. We've got to look both at demand as well as supply.
The other major factor here is how much student loan debt young Americans have. 59% of U.S. adults say they've delayed financial milestones because of their student debt.
I do have a student loan payment.
Yeah, see, that's the one thing. I don't have that.
It's about $480 a month. So that's my largest expense.
The liability could be worse for Black borrowers, who tend to have higher than average student loan debt and less wealth than white counterparts. Black and Hispanic respondents were more likely to say that debt was holding them back from reaching financial milestones. Less than half of white respondents said the same.
The amount of debt young adults held also rose
insane.
substantially between 2005 and 2014, during that period of strong escalation in that cohort living with their parents.
Aggregate student loans are such an enormous part of the economy now, and that's not a reflection of younger people making bad choices with their education. It's really a consequence in large part due to the fact that there's less public funding and going to college just is more expensive, which makes it even harder for even those college grads who are hoping to get earning more money as a result of their college degrees.
Student loan debt by itself can't explain the phenomenon, especially considering so many European countries with much less student loan debt have higher rates rates of young adults living with their parents.
24 out of 29 European countries had more 18 to 34-year-olds living with their parents in 2021 than the US. It was over 70% in Italy, Portugal, Greece, Serbia, and Croatia.
My boyfriend is Brazilian, and multi-generational homes are very common in almost everywhere else in the world, except in the United States. So I'm just taking a page of their playbook.
I mean, it is because poverty is more prevalent in those countries, and America, it was easier to achieve the dream of moving out at a young age, of having your own house and stuff like that. That's why it was a trend and why people stopped doing that. You know what I'm saying? I'm pretty sure earlier in America that was commonplace. You know what I'm saying? Having the kids stay at their parents until they got married. You know, that was pretty much
the Americans,
or the man. Well, obviously the boys of the men of the house, like the kids, if they're men, they probably had to go work and get their own stuff. You know, get a car. But you could do that on one income back in the 20s, 30s, 50s. You know, 60s, 70s. You know, it's achievable to do on your own as a man. You know, and then you find a wife, and then she moves in with you, and you marry her.
are probably the only people that they're not multi-generations in one house. And I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I think it's kind of nice. Why do we have to be so cold to push everybody out?
You know, there are a lot of cultures out there in which it is normal to live with your parents until you get married. And I don't think there's necessarily an economic explanation for that.
The Franklins would say in the US, it is the economy, but Victoria's mom is kind of okay with it.
Unfortunately, it is the economy and the world that we live in that just doesn't allow them to go live a comfortable life. So with them living here was no big deal. It's not really a problem. They're saving their money eventually.
I did that with my mom. I lived with her. I have my own apartment now, and I'm struggling, obviously. Having, like, no money. That's why I live stream every day, play video games on my off time. You know, it's the only thing I have to do. I can't, like, I don't have money to go spend elsewhere. But, like, yeah, fucking, my mom, they just kicked me out. They moved, and they're like, oh, you gotta go figure it out. It's just, I don't know. I think some parents just want their own space, but still, I mean, I don't think it's a problem.
They'll buy a house.
Like, my daughter, I have a daughter. She's with her mom, but, like, she always has a place to stay with me. You know what I mean?
And that works.
Until she gets married, she always has a place to stay. Anyways, what's this?